Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Henry Schein Dental Academy webinar series. My name is Adam, Marketing Specialist, and I'll be your moderator. We're excited to welcome Phylip Curtis, Director of Sales for Unitas Dental, as our speaker today, as he will discuss PPO negotiation strategies and how to raise your reimbursements. Before we get started, we've got a few reminders for you. At any point during the webinar, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A section of your control panel, and we'll answer the questions live at the end of the presentation. Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand. And this webinar is sponsored by Henry Schein's Dental Business Institute, as well as Unitas Dental. With that, I will throw it over to Phylip.
All right, thanks, Adam. Well, for those of you joining us today, I'm super excited. I've been waiting for this at least the last 2 weeks. So I'm very excited to go over this information with you guys today. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay and you can see my screen all right. Feel free to use that chat window down below. As I go throughout the presentation, I'm sure there'll be tons of questions. There generally is, especially with this topic of PPO negotiation. So feel free to use that chat window or the Q&A window, and Adam and I will try to get through those as we get towards the end of the presentation. But get out a notepad and paper, and then also get out your phone because we'll be using that on the presentation today. What we're going to talk about today is just the top PPO negotiation strategies and how you can raise your reimbursements. I'm really excited about today's presentation because the information I'm going over today is information that we've never gone into before, at least at this depth and at this breadth of information. We're going through basically our entire PPO negotiation framework. We're opening it up to everybody, and we're revealing it kind of on this webinar presentation today. So I'm super excited for that. I'm going to go through the nitty-gritty details of how to go through the negotiation process for your own practice. But first, I just want to introduce myself. Like Adam said, my name is Phylip Curtis. I've been working here at Unitas Dental for actually close to 8 years now. We've been in business for about 10. And I've worked in a bunch of different capacities here at Unitas. Started out working and doing some data entry and working as assistants on the accounts that we work for. I've done some graphic design, some marketing, some sales, some IT operations. So I've kind of worked both all around kind of aspect of what we do here at Unitas, and had a really cool perspective of how we've helped out customers. And then also just worked within the marketing and helping practices understand that this is possible. And this is my contact information down below. So if you've got questions throughout the presentation today, feel free to go ahead and give me a call or shoot me an email. But I just want to give you a quick introduction to Unitas and kind of why we're even talking about this today. You may have heard about us before, or may have heard about just the concept of PPO negotiation, but we at Unitas, we've been helping dental practices specifically in the space of insurance since 2011. We've worked with thousands of practices. We've worked in all 50 states. We represent over 900 practices right now, helping them to negotiate their insurance reimbursement rates and optimize their participation. And we also help a lot of practices just to get credentialed with insurance to begin with. We're all located in Mesa, Arizona, and we've got over 45 insurance experts on staff. Here's a couple of pictures of our team, and I'm really excited to present this information to you guys today. So what we're going to cover on today's presentation is, like I said, it's some new information. Some of it's something that you may have heard before in previous webinars, but we're going to a lot more depth than we have before. We're giving you really a zoomed out picture of how all these pieces fit together. We're going to talk about really what are the key strategies to actually increasing your own PPO reimbursements, and kind of what are the step-by-step process that you can actually go through as a practice if you wanted to do this on your own. We're going to cover kind of three main areas. Number one, we're going to talk about first, how to understand PPO participation and your current reimbursements and setting the stage and preparing yourself to negotiate. Then we're going to talk about really what are the 6 top PPO negotiation tactics. So we'll get into actual tactical information. And then lastly, we'll go over how do you actually maximize those negotiation opportunities. So if you're going to even try this and even go into this kind of aspect of your business, how do you make sure that you maximize those opportunities? Because the window can be small, and depending on how you do it, you definitely want to make sure that you get the best return on investment that you can. So we're going to go over all that information today, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So again, start to send your questions through the chat window or the Q&A window as we go through this, and Adam and I will try to shoot those out as we come to the end of the presentation. So my goal today, this is the standard that you need to hold me to. So by the end of today's webinar, I want you to know basically one thing. The only way that you can truly increase your reimbursement rates and to make more profit each year at your practice is by following the step-by-step process that I'm going to go through today, which we've kind of called the PPO Negotiation Quick Start Guide. Okay. This is a process that you can follow. We're going to go through all the steps today. We're also going to give you a link to download it. So as I go through these pieces of information today, I'll try to expound as much as I can. But a lot of this information is pretty deep, and it's very specific. So what we've done is we've actually created the quick start guide in a PDF format. So if you want to go at any time throughout the presentation today to follow along with what I'm going to go through, if you go to www.ppoguide.com, you can actually download everything I'm going to review today, which is the full step-by-step breakdown, the exact framework that we follow with our clients that you can actually do on your own if you want to go through the PPO negotiation process. So go ahead, you can go there right now, you can pull it up on your phone, download that and follow along if you want to, or you can do it any time after the presentation today. So that's just a little PDF free guide. You don't have to pay anything for it. You just put in your name, your email. You can download it right now and look at it as I'm going through this presentation. So again, what I'm going to cover today is really the key strategies to increasing PPO reimbursements. And I'm going to first start with understanding PPO participation. Because what we found with a lot of practices is that not very many of them either understand PPO participation or understand the differences of PPO participation. And we'll talk about how to understand really what your true reimbursement rates are to then set yourself up for success if you actually go into the process to negotiate. So the three things I'm going to hit in this key are discovering and mapping out what your PPO participation is. We'll talk about how do you actually receive and document your actual fee schedule reimbursements. And then we'll talk about, once you have that, how to compare and actually repair UCR versus reimbursement discrepancies, which we'll get into that detail. So I'm really excited, okay? First, discovering and mapping your PPO participation. So the first thing to understand is that there's different types of PPO participation. It's something that I talk about all the time, and I feel like I'm a broken record, but it's something that I constantly expound on and constantly talk to practices about, because there's just a lot of confusion about how insurance participation works. So some of you that are on the call today might understand how these work and what they are, and I know some of you might not and want some more information. So I'm going to go into some detail. Again, this might be repetitive information, but I promise you that it's foundational to understanding how to actually negotiate and optimize. So even if this is information you've heard before, make sure that you're listening and paying attention to those details, because this is super important. Again, you can download that guide if you need to, but let's kind of walk through this today. And then as you have questions, send them through and we'll try to knock them out as we go through this. Okay, so many practices think that when I join an insurance company, I've joined, right? I've agreed to that reimbursement rate. Everything's hunky-dory. I treat the patient, I send the claim, I get the payment back. That's insurance participation. And that's typically how it was a few years ago, but things have started to change. When you actually participate with an insurance company as a dentist, you can send in a credentialing application, and typically that will result in what's called a direct contract, okay? Or things that might happen to you are PPO to PPO leasing arrangements or umbrella networking, okay? So I'm gonna go over those in a second, but first what we need to know is, what are your participation types? So to find that out, what you're gonna need to do is you're gonna need to call the provider relations rep from each insurance company and confirm the participation for each of your doctors per location, because the participation can be different, okay? So how do you do that? You put that down into a spreadsheet. You put your doctors, you put your locations if you have multiple, but then you put each doctor in each insurance company. You're gonna ask them a couple of questions. Number one, how is my doctor participating with you? Is the main question you're gonna ask the PPO. They're gonna respond one of three ways, or four ways technically. He or she is either out of network or they're in network. And if they're in network, they're either under what's called a direct contract, they're gonna be leased through another PPO company, or they're being leased or networked underneath an umbrella company like Carrington, Connection, or Dynamex, okay? Then there's gonna be an associated effective date. So when was the doctor in network under that arrangement? And then also, what's the fee schedule associated to that arrangement? So you're asking for all three of those things from the insurance company, okay? From the provider relations rep. They should be able to get that information. It might take a couple phone calls, but it's definitely possible. That's what we do for our clients. You can definitely do that. You put that down into a spreadsheet and document it, okay? It's all preparatory to starting the negotiation process, right? Now let's go back and really define how do direct contracts, leasing arrangements, and umbrella networks work, and to understand, once we find that out, really what we can do with that information, okay? So you're asking, how is my doctor in network with you? Or how is he or she participating with you? You're asking that to the insurance rep. You're getting the type, the effective date, and the fee schedule, okay? You're asking for a copy of it, and they should send it to you, either email or fax. It should be either a PDF or an Excel version, okay? Let's talk about, what do I mean by those three different types of contracts? And again, if you understand these and you're not really getting the answer that you need from the PPO, understanding how these works will help you ask the additional questions that you might need to ask to get the true answer that you're looking for. Because one thing that you'll find is sometimes, depending on how you phrase it, it's difficult to get the right answer from the insurance company. And that's also difficult depending on who you're talking to, okay? So let's go over these three types. There's direct contracts, right? A direct contract is how insurance companies should work. That's how you assume that they work. What that means is you credentialed with that insurance company as the doctor at your location. When you credentialed, you agreed to that specific fee schedule or set of fee schedules for those plans. You send in that credentialing application, you were accepted, you now have an effective date, meaning as of this date, I can treat patients in network. A portion or all of those claims will be paid according to the reimbursement rates on the fee schedule I agreed to, right? So I send a claim for that patient, payment comes back from that PPO according to those rates that I agreed to. That's a direct contract, right? That's how we think all insurance company should work, but that's not how all insurance relationships do work. And it's not necessarily the best type of participation. It's just one type of participation, okay? So that's a direct contract. PPO to PPO leasing arrangements are typically participation that happens to you. It's not usually something that you choose. It's not typically something that you elect to do unless you purposely elect to do so, which we'll talk about here later on. But PPO to PPO leasing arrangements happen all the time. They're not necessarily a bad thing. They're just different. So how do they happen? Well, let's say you credentialed with one specific insurance company. Okay, this orange insurance company, you agreed to their rates. You're treating their patients. Everything's going great. Then a couple of weeks or a couple of years go down the line, and you might get a letter in the mail from that orange insurance company that says, congratulations, you're now in network with this green insurance company through our contract. So maybe you got the letter, maybe you didn't see it, but that was your notification. And what that means is we've now leased you out to another PPO, and those PPO patients might now start showing up at your practice, which can be a great thing, but they're paid underneath our reimbursement rates. So how does that work? You credentialed with PPO orange, but PPO green patients start coming into your practice. So you send a claim to PPO green, and the claim's paid underneath the reimbursement rates that you agree to with PPO orange. Again, that could be a great thing if you get more patients. Maybe it's not a great thing though if the reimbursement rates you're getting through PPO orange aren't very high or they're low according to what you've seen. If that's the case, now you've just got more patients paid onto a lower reimbursement. Okay, so can that be a dangerous scenario for you or a difficult scenario? Definitely. You don't want all your eggs in a basket, especially if that fee schedule is low. So we want to know if that's happening. That's why we're asking those questions of the PPO. Okay, are we being leased, right? If we're being leased, who are we being leased through? So maybe you're calling the PPO and they say, all right, we have Dr. Smith. He's in network through Guardian, right? Or he's in network under Carrington, okay? So umbrella networking is similar to the last scenario. It's just a little bit more complicated and the web is larger, okay? So umbrella networks, those are companies like Carrington, Connection, Zealous, I think I'm missing some, Dynamax, right? Typically those carriers, they're called umbrella networks or their formal name is a third-party administrator. They typically don't have card-carrying patients. What their value proposition is to practices is they typically have pretty competitive fee schedule reimbursements. And they've already partnered with lots of insurance companies. So one of the things that they can do is if you sign up for that umbrella network, they'll shoot your information out to their network of dentists, their network of PPOs, and you can get a network quickly with a lot of PPOs at once under one specific fee schedule, which is great if that fee schedule is high. If that fee schedule is relatively low, again, now you've got a bunch of PPOs funneled through a low fee schedule, right? So again, we're starting to understand what are some of the issues that come up, but laying out and understanding participation helps us know both what questions to ask and then also knows kind of what strategies to implement. So that's why I'm kind of going into this much detail. Okay. Again, if you've got questions with the info I'm going through, write them out now. Even if you don't want to write it out yet, write it out in the chat window and then click send now or towards the end of the presentation and we'll try to go through those. Okay. So umbrella networks, like I said, by their nature, aren't a bad thing for your practice. They can be great. They can get you a network with a lot of PPOs at once. They can also have great reimbursement rates. But again, it just comes down to we need to know if that's how you're participating. So are you a network with Guardian directly? Or are you a network with Guardian under Carrington or Connection? Are you a network directly with MetLife or are you a network with MetLife under Carrington? Those are the questions that we need to ask and the answers that we need to receive. Because depending on what you find, that's going to determine how far and really what types of negotiation efforts you can do, depending on how that specific doctor is situated. Now it gets more complicated when you add doctors and locations because the type of participation that you're set up under as a doctor is determined by that doctor for that tax ID at that location. So you could have the same doctor, Dr. Joe Smith or Dr. Bob, he could be participating with a specific PPO directly at one of his locations, go to the next location, and it could even be under the same tax ID number, and he could be in network underneath an umbrella. So what does that mean? You could technically treat a patient here, get paid this reimbursement, and treat a patient over here, get paid this reimbursement. So different rates. not necessarily the ideal. So that's why we want to know what is the participation for each doctor at each location and what is the associated fee schedule, because that will map out what is truly happening now in terms of what your reimbursement rates are. And once you have that snapshot and that picture, you can then start to improve upon it. Otherwise, if you're going into this process blind, you really have no clue, what am I negotiating? What am I improving? It's just like treating a patient. If a patient came in and said, I think this tooth hurts, I don't think there's a dentist on this webinar today that would just start drilling around. They would do an x-ray first, right? They want to make sure that they know exactly what's going on before they prescribe treatment and actually do treatment. It's the same thing with PPO negotiations. You want to know exactly what the participation type is before you ever pick up the phone to negotiate, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Those are the 3 types of participation, okay? So again, just to bring this home, why you're doing all this effort and asking all these questions, it's because we have to understand, how do you participate? And that will tell you ultimately what needs to be done in order to negotiate. Just like the patient example. If a patient comes in and you do an x-ray and they need a filling because they have a cavity, then that's what they need. They don't need a root canal. If they need a root canal because it's that bad, then they don't need a filling, right? The problem basically determines what the solution is, right? So you have to know what the true problem is in order to prescribe the correct solution. It's the same thing here. All right. So that's that point there. Okay, now moving on. So we've been talking about, for those of you that are joining on, I know I've probably gotten started a little early. We're talking about the step-by-step framework of how to actually negotiate and improve your own reimbursement rates. Okay. The first process that we've gone through is knowing and mapping out how you're participating. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there is a ton of information I'm going to go over today. So if you want it in a written worksheet format that you can actually follow, then you want to go to www.ppo, as in PPO insurance, ppoguide.com, and you can download that right now and follow along with me. You can download it, print it out, show it to your doctor, show it to your office manager, use it as an actual process and worksheet. So go ahead and download that now while you're on the call and follow along. Okay, back to this step. So again, we're talking about what participation do we have per doctor per location? And then we're talking about now, how do we know what we're actually being paid? So the process for receiving and documenting your actual fee schedule reimbursements, here's what you shouldn't do. Go into Dentrix and check what you have now. What you need to do is you need to call or email for current fee schedules per doctor, per location. So as you're asking for participation, you need to ask for what the exact fee schedule is that's associated to each of those participation types, okay? So as you get that information back from the PPO, like I said, they'll send it to you maybe in a PDF format or an Excel format. And then you take that information and put it into Dentrix. I tell you, I've talked to thousands and thousands of practices, and I think everybody would agree that a lot of times what you have in your practice management software is not the most up to date. Even if it's something that you got in January, if you're going to enter the realm of PPO negotiations, you want to know exactly what's happened, okay? Same thing applies to the patient. Again, if you've done an x-ray 2 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, a lot of practices want to have a recent x-ray to know exactly what's happening because things can change. It's the same thing here. You want to know the participation to know the associated rates of reimbursement, okay? So you want to reach out, get those fee schedules sent back to you, put them into Dentrix. All of this is preparatory to the negotiation process, okay? Lastly, now once you have that, there's kind of 2 birds that you can kill with 1 stone, which is you need to fix any UCR versus reimbursement discrepancies, okay? How you fix that and what I mean by that is if you have any of your UCR office fees, so the prices that you set for your procedure, if any of those are below what any of your highest PPO reimbursements are, they need to be raised, okay? Why they need to be raised is the PPO assumes that you're going to take a discount off of your UCR. The patient also assumes that as well, okay? So if you submit and say my procedure is $100 and they've already agreed to reimburse you $60, that's what you're going to get, right? However, let's say you said that your UCR was $55 and they've agreed to reimburse $60. Guess what you're never going to receive? $60. Guess what you're also never going to receive? Probably $55. You're likely going to take a percentage discount, okay? PPOs want to show to the patient that there's been a discount. That's the value proposition of a PPO. So you need to start with healthy, competitive UCRs and then assume that there's going to be a discount. Okay, I see my chat window exploding right now because every time we talk about this, practices always wonder, well, I don't want to see a write-off, okay? I don't want to see a write-off. We're doing a webinar next month to talk about write-offs and why that write-off really isn't the issue that we should be focusing on here, because the write-off is something that you would have never, is something that you're supposed to receive. In this case, you're never receiving your full UCR, you're receiving the reimbursement. So again, that's why that matters, okay? That's part of the negotiation process. If you say my rates are here, they're gonna have a hard time justifying paying you anymore, okay? That's the part of the reason. We've asked every single PPO and they expect that on the claim form that you submit your UCR so that way they can show and see a discount. Part of the reason why you submit your UCR is that tells PPOs across the country what the going rate for dentistry is and what the market rate is. And then they continue to set their fee schedules accordingly. So if every doctor sets their fee down here because they're just billing out their reimbursement rate, you're pulling the market down. You're pulling the market down and saying, this is actually what we charge. And then they're going to take a reimbursement below that, okay? All right, so again, we're gonna get more into that information to the next webinar about how to mitigate that write-off concept. But for now, it's really important to know that you just wanna have very competitive UCRs and then assume that there's gonna be a discount there. And if any of your UCR office fees are below what any of your reimbursements are, you need to bump them up at least marginally, okay? So how do you do that? First, you enter your fee schedules into a spreadsheet and you compare them across your top 35 procedures. We'll get into in the next step how to determine your top 35 procedures. So imagine a spreadsheet, you've got your top 35 grossing procedures, and then you put in the reimbursement rates for every PPO. Then you compare them. If any of your UCRs are lower than any of those reimbursement rates, they need to come up, okay? For number one, because you're pulling the market rate down. Number two, you're probably never gonna get reimbursed your maximum fee. And number three, if we go to negotiate, you've shot yourself in the foot because you've said, I only charge this. Well, then they're never gonna come above it, okay? So raise your UCRs where necessary. No UCR should be at or below your highest reimbursing PPO fee schedule, okay? The next thing is you need to utilize available percentile-based analysis tools. So I know Henry Schein has one of these. This is something that we do for our customers. Utilize a percentile-based analysis tool to ensure that not only are your UCRs at or above, or should I say, not only are they above your highest reimbursing PPO fee schedule, but they need to be competitive for your area, okay? Competitive rates and rates that are above the reimbursing fee schedule correlate to higher reimbursements, okay? Again, what we're talking about is what are the steps we need to go through in order to prepare ourselves to negotiate. These are some of those steps. And this is the exact framework that we follow with our clients. And this is the exact framework that you should follow if you're going to do this on your own, okay? That's how we compare and repair UCR reimbursement discrepancies. Again, if you've got questions, send them in through the chat window, okay? So that's the end of key number one. Let's talk about key number two. So now that we know how to map out our participation, how to collect our fee schedules, how to document our participation, how to fix any discrepancies, now let's transition to how do we actually start the negotiation process. So the three things we're going to cover is number one, we need to ensure we don't waste time on procedures, codes, or the wrong procedure codes when negotiating. Number two, we need to know how to actually approach the negotiation process correctly. And then number three, we need to talk about how do you actually compare offers received from the PPOs, make sure that we're doing this the right way, okay? Now, here's your next reminder. Again, for all of those that you've joined on late into the game, we're going through the exact step-by-step process that we go through with our customers in this whole webinar. If you wanted to implement this framework on your own, I highly recommend you download our PPO negotiation quick start guide. It's a free PDF going through all this information that I'm covering today in a nice downloadable PDF printable worksheet format that you can follow along with today and then also use for implementation of the things we've talked about. I know a lot of times it's nice to watch webinars, but what we're talking about here are things that you can actually do. We want to go over that info and give you the actual actionable steps. So if you go to that website, you put in literally just your name, your email, you can download it right now and follow along, print it out, give it to your staff, give it to your dentist, and talk about it from there, okay? So go ahead and do that. Now, if you haven't done that yet, go download that right now. Moving on to step two, okay? So first, how do we ensure we don't waste time on the wrong procedures? Number one, what you wanna do is you wanna export an annual production summary from your practice management software. If you don't know how to do that, if you're using Dentrix or anybody else, I guarantee you either their support staff or they have a forum article online that tells you how to do it. What we're looking for is a 12-month production summary report. It should list out every procedure code you do. So all the CDT codes, so D0120 and D0150, how many times you did that code that year, and the total amount of revenue or production generated from those codes, okay? Once you have all that information, you can put it into a spreadsheet and sort the procedures by the highest growing production to determine out of all the procedures you've done in a given year, the specific different codes, what are the top 35 most popular procedures, okay? What generates the most revenue? That way, next in step 2, when you're comparing fee schedule offers, right, from the PPOs, you're focusing on the procedures that actually move the needle for your practice. Okay. It doesn't mean you need to ignore other procedures. It also doesn't mean that when you negotiate, PPOs will ignore those procedures. What we found is that typically your top 35 grossing procedure codes make up over 95% of all the revenue you generate as a practice. So when it comes to making decisions, those are the procedures that matter. Okay. So use those procedures in step 2 that I talked about before, and also when comparing PPO fee schedule offers that we'll talk about next. Okay. Right. If any questions, put them in through chat window. Again, export that annual production summary. It needs to be 12 months at least. Show every procedure, quantity, production, sort it by highest grossing to come up with your top 35. Okay. Moving on. All right. Approaching the negotiation process. Number 1, you can reach out to provider relations and request a fee schedule increase. Now, you need to know how you participate before you do that, right? So you need to pay attention to that participation in any leasing arrangements. So what do I mean by that? If you're leasing or if you're being leased right now, so let's say you're in network with Guardian, where you're actually paid under Aetna's contracted fees, then you should technically negotiate with Guardian to increase the fee schedules for both of these patients. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I'm in network with Guardian, and when I was finding out my participation, that I'm actually in network underneath Aetna's contracted fee schedule, the fee schedule that's being used for both of these patient bases is Aetna's. So I need to negotiate with Aetna. Okay. Talk about how to pivot and potentially utilize both those offers in a little bit, but that's what I mean by paying attention. So if you reach out to the provider relations rep, you can request a fee schedule increase, okay? Whether that's by phone or by email. You call, say, I'd like to request a fee schedule increase for my practice, okay? That's how you approach the negotiation process. Now let's talk about if you start to receive offers back from the PPO, how do you actually evaluate them and make decisions, okay? So using the previous steps, you need to first start by identifying your top 35 procedures. So whatever has the highest quantity in production, you take all that information, you put it into a spreadsheet. You got your top 35 codes, then you plug in what are the reimbursement rates that I'm getting for those procedures right now versus what are the reimbursement rates I'm going to get on this new offered fee schedule from the insurance company. Okay. Once I see those, I'll understand if there's been an increase or if there's been a decrease, because that happens frequently. So we need to pay attention to the annual frequency from the production summary of each procedure when you're evaluating those offers. So some fee schedules may increase from one reimbursement to the next. It could be $5, it could be $20, it could be $200, but sometimes they can decrease as well. Part of that is part of the strategy from the PPO, right? Is they might be willing to give you some here, but they'll take away here. That happens all the time, okay? Does not happen always, but it can happen. So if that's the situation, you need to pay attention to increases and decreases, because here's a good example. If a procedure went up by $100, but another procedure went down by $5, depending on the frequency of those two procedures, that might be an ultimate net loss for you, right? So if you only do that procedure 20 times, but you do this other procedure 2,000 times, that's a net loss, okay? So that's what I mean by looking at your production summary and seeing how frequently you do those codes. Is ultimately, if there's been an increase and a decrease, you need to understand how frequently those codes happen on average to understand if this offer is actually worth accepting, because it might look great until you run the numbers, okay? Lastly, once you've accepted a fee schedule, so if you're okay with it, once you've accepted a fee schedule and you send it back, you typically will sign it, you'll send it back to an insurance company, then you need to actually make sure that it falls into place, okay? We have this happen all the time with the clients that we work with. We do this whole process for them, okay? And then we still want to audit UOBs that come back to make sure that you're actually paid on the correct reimbursement, because things happen, okay? You can send it back, doesn't guarantee that all the bricks are going to lay correctly and everything's going to fall into place to make sure that it actually gets reimbursed correctly, okay? That's a whole lot of hope. If you're going to just sign it and then walk away, there's a whole lot of hope there. So some fee schedule increases can take 30 days or more to go into effect. So you want to audit your EOBs after accepting a new fee schedule to make sure you're actually reimbursed correctly. And if you're not, you take that claim, try to kick it back to the person that you negotiated with to see if you can get it reprocessed, okay? This is all possible. We do this every day. We do this thousands of times a year. This is not pie in the sky strategies. These are possible. These are the tactics we do every single day, okay? So that's how you compare those offers. Again, if you've got questions, send them in through the chat. Again, I know I'm going kind of fast, but we have tons of information that I want to go over all of it today and not take up so much of your time. So that's why we gave you that guide, is if you need kind of like a digestible, slower version, something that you can follow along with, that guide is really helpful. And it's a worksheet, and you can go through it step by step and implement this stuff we're talking about. Okay. All right. Again, there's your reminder, one of your final reminders. If you want to download that step-by-step framework, go to www.ppoguide.com. Okay. All right. Moving on. Key number 3. So now that we know how to prepare and now that we know how to negotiate, let's talk about how do we maximize this opportunity. Okay. Every practice that participates with PPOs, we firmly believe should attempt to negotiate their insurance reimbursements. Okay. That should happen across the boards. Typically, PPOs expect you to do that. They're not going to just give it to you. They expect you to negotiate, okay? Now, there's 3 key principles here in terms of maximizing that negotiation opportunity, okay? Again, if you got questions, send them in through, but this is super important. Okay, so number 1, we're going to talk about how do you ensure that your PPO offers are competitive for your area. You can know your participation. You can go ahead and negotiate. You can even get an offer back from the PPO. You can do that comparison I just talked to you about, make sure that there's a net gain for you. But ultimately, how do you know that the offer you just received is actually a competitive offer, or is it really not that great? Okay. So how do you ensure that? How do you know that it's competitive? We'll talk about that. Next, we'll talk about how do you minimize optimization risks. So we'll talk about how does optimization work and then how to actually minimize those risks. So if you're switching around participation, you need to know how to minimize the risk and to maximize the benefits, okay? Because it doesn't come without risk, but it's also, there's a lot of opportunity there, okay? Lastly, we'll talk about how do we calculate, or how can you calculate your return on investment of doing all this work? Because we're going through all this information. I guarantee you, whether you're a dentist, an office manager, front office staff, you're looking at this and saying, holy smokes, this is a lot of work. So how do you make sure that it's worth your time to go through it? Okay. There's calculations that we can run together to ensure that this actually makes sense for you. Okay. There's a lot of things you can do to grow your practice. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can improve on them. So whenever you're trying to take the step in that direction to increase your profit or to increase your margins, you want to make sure that it's going to work for you. Okay. Let's go into that information. Now, how do you ensure your PPO offers are competitive? All right. So like I've said, we at Unitas, we've done this for thousands and thousands of practices over the course of 10 years. We do it every single day. We negotiate with PPOs. So one of my first biggest tips for you to ensure that your offers are competitive, honestly, is to seek professional representation before you negotiate with your PPOs. Okay. So why do I think it's important to seek professional representation and work with somebody like us at Unitas before negotiating is because of how the process works. When you accept a new fee schedule and you've negotiated, whether on your own or with us, and you've signed off on that fee schedule typically will get locked in for a minimum of 2 years, minimum. We've seen some people get locked in that fee schedule longer than 2 years. So what does that mean? Both the window of time to take advantage of this opportunity is small and it's very high risk. So what does that mean? If you lock in a fee schedule that's low and you do this on your own, okay, you assume the risk that you've accepted the fee schedule that you accepted and you were locked into it for a long time. So if you go in and you negotiate on your own, and you follow this entire process, which you can, practices do, and you accept a fee schedule, and you don't know how competitive that is, but it looks good to you, once you sign your name on that dotted line, it is locked in, okay? So one of the benefits of working with somebody like us at Unitas is not only do we follow this framework, not only have we perfected it, this is our framework, we've got a team to implement this for you, but one of our biggest propositions to a practice and why I think it's worth working with somebody like us is we have the data. We've worked with so many practices across so many different states that we have tens of thousands of fee schedules. So we know how to compare those fee schedules you receive, not only against what you're getting paid on now, but against the thousands of fee schedules we've received in your area for that PPO. So we'll be able to analyze and understand, is this actually a competitive offer or is this actually pretty low? Okay. What that does for us is it tells us how far to continue to push. Is this good or is this pretty low? Or do I think I can get better? And again, understanding that there may be better out there doesn't mean that better is ever achieved. It doesn't mean that whether you or I do it, it doesn't mean that you're going to obtain that. One of the things that I like to compare this to is we recently sold our house. Okay. It's a crazy market right now, but we listed our house and we had an offer in 3 days. It was insane. I had no idea that it was going to happen this fast, but we had an offer in 3 days. It was above our asking price. So we were super excited about it. It was the first time we've ever sold a house. And our realtor says, all right, hold on. I know you're super excited about this and I know it's above your asking price, but I actually think you can get more. So if you're okay with waiting, We can wait, we can hold out a couple more days, but their offer might expire. So you got to make a decision here. A lot of that applies to PPO negotiations as well, especially when we're doing this for you. Okay. So when we get an offer back from a PPO, we can compare it against what you've received. We can compare it against what we've seen from the PPO in the past. And then we'll be able to give you a recommendation, which is the most powerful thing we can provide, which is either this is a great fee schedule for your area, I recommend you accept it, or we can be able to say, you know what, this is decent, but I've seen better recently. So if you're okay with waiting, I'm gonna try to go back for more, but it doesn't guarantee that there's gonna be a better offer on the table. Just like my agent told me when I was selling my house, the same thing can be told to you guys when we negotiate on your behalf, okay? But ultimately, in a situation where you're locked into that fee schedule for 2 years or more, it can be very advantageous to work with somebody like us to make sure that your offers at a minimum have been analyzed to ensure that they're competitive, let alone to outsource all of this labor to somebody who does this every single day, okay? Also, when we're negotiating, we have high-level insurance contacts. So again, the average practice has to reach out to provider relations to negotiate. Typically, we have a person or a series of people at a PPO that we work with to negotiate day after day after day, because we do this for so many practices. So with that comes advantages. We can be fat. We can typically be pretty quick, but then also it allows us to negotiate at a high level. One of the benefits that we bring to the PPO side is we help tons of practices get credentialed. Because we help bring tons of doctors, it allows us to negotiate at a high level with the insurance companies, right? Not only do we know what good reimbursement rates look like, but we have access to people that practices typically don't have access to. When it comes to negotiations, that can pay off. Okay, so that's another reason why I think it's worth seeking professional representation, specifically considering to work with Unitas. Okay. Lastly, Unitas negotiates on behalf of thousands of practices nationwide. So we have the time, we have the expertise, we have the resources to do this for you. You have a practice that you're running. I doubt there's anybody on your team right now that wants to or even can spend all the time that it's going to take and to get this done as quickly as you want it to get it done. Okay. Lastly, like I said, Unitas, we have a highly trained team. We have years of experience. We have a proven track record in negotiations and optimization. So that's one of the ways that you can ensure your PPO offers are competitive, is to seek professional representation, okay? Lastly, let's talk about how do you minimize optimization risks, okay? And how do you maximize those benefits? What we've kind of highlighted on is when there's PPOs that have networking with each other, where you can get paid for Guardian underneath this PPO or paid for Aetna underneath this PPO. A lot of times you need to negotiate with a single party to improve the rates for both carriers. But when those partnerships exist, you can typically take advantage of them and shift participation around to make sure that you shift reimbursements underneath a different contract. So what do I mean by that? Based on your current participation, Unitas can identify other arrangements that may be more profitable than just negotiating with that PPO one. So for example, if you're a network with one PPO, I guarantee you that PPO has probably 6 or 7 other paths to participation, okay? So let's say this PPO has 5 paths to participation. You're currently contracted with this way, right? So we'll negotiate this current fee schedule. We'll also look at this PPO. So let's say it's Carrington, Guardian, Connection, Dynamax, okay? We'll negotiate with Carrington, Guardian, Connection, Dynamax, because all of them have a fee schedule, just like this one has a fee schedule. If any of these are higher than this contract, depending on how you participate, you may be able to identify that arrangement and switch the participation to take advantage of it, okay? However, just because they have multiple paths doesn't mean that there aren't risks involved. So we understand not only how to switch participation, but we understand the risks, meaning is there going to be out of network time? How much documentation and paperwork needs to be submitted to make sure that it actually falls into place. And we understand how long it takes, right? Some of these can take a while. Some of these are quick. Some of these can take, a month or two. Ultimately, we do this all the time for practices. So if you want to take advantage of those optimization opportunities, which most practices do, that's why I usually recommend that you seek professional representation, because this is what we do day in and day out. Most practices either don't have the time or the understanding to implement those optimization options. They're very risky. Okay, they definitely come with risk, but there's a ton of reward. You just have to understand how to do it. So that's another reason. That's another way to minimize those risks is professional guidance and professional outsourcing. Okay. Lastly, so let's calculate the return on investment in general from negotiations. So one of the benefits is, since we've done this thousands and thousands and thousands of times, we track the results that we obtain per PPO, per state, per customer. So if you implement this plan, or I guess if Unitas has implemented this plan and this framework, like I said, for thousands of practices over 10 years. So we can project the return on investment based on our efforts through the average results that we've seen. And I've got that data for you here right now, okay? So How do we calculate your return on investment? So if Unitas did this for you, right, or if we negotiated on your behalf, based on our average results, what are the opportunities that lay out there for you? Ultimately, this is a lot of time. Obviously, Unitas isn't free. If you did this on your own, that wouldn't be free either because you're going to spend a bunch of time. So how do we know that this is worth investing time and resources into? Well, we'll do the simple math here and kind of explain it. So how I start on this calculation is we start with your annual production. The average practice that we talk to typically does over $1 million in annual production. If yours is lower than that or higher than that, then adjust accordingly, okay? Because this math is pretty simple. You can follow along. Then we determine, all right, on average, what percentage of your patients are under what we consider negotiable insurance companies, okay? Most insurance companies will either negotiate with us and or we can do that optimization I was just referring to. There's very few that have no path to a higher reimbursement, okay? So obviously a cash paying patient, they're not PPO, that's not gonna be negotiable. Anybody that's Medicare or Medicaid, right, or like a TRICARE member, those typically aren't gonna be negotiated. Delta Dental is another one of those PPOs that historically just does not negotiate. We've worked with them thousands and thousands of times and they have not changed over 10 years. We continue to attempt that. We continue to want our providers to attempt that, but they typically won't negotiate. Most every other PPO that we've worked with will either negotiate and or optimize their contracts. Doesn't mean that they will, just means that they have a history of doing that. And we've done it for thousands and thousands of practices, okay? So if on average, 50% of your practice is under negotiable insurances, which most practices have at least 50% of their patient base under that group. So anybody who's not Delta, anybody who's not cash paying, anybody who's not Medicare or Medicaid, right? On average, if you looked at the percentage of your patient base, what percentage would you say is under negotiables? It's typically about 50%, okay? So if you do $1 million in production, 50% of it's PPO increasable or negotiable, right? Just made up a word, increasable. So go ahead and quote me on that. 50% of it is increasable, then that means you have $500,000 in negotiable production. So based on our average results, our average customer sees about a 10% increase in their reimbursement rates through us doing negotiations and our optimization efforts. So on average, if you got a 10% increase on 500,000 in production, that's where you get to an average yield of $50,000 in additional profit, not revenue, straight profit to the practice, okay? Now, below average is around a 4% increase. Again, if you did $1 million on these numbers, that's a $20,000 increase. Above average is an 18% increase, about $90,000, okay? Again, that's a projection. That's all based off of the averages that we've seen. That math is very simple. You can adjust it for your production and then adjust it for your percentage of patients if you think that's larger or smaller, and then again, use that scale, okay? Now, I just want to share some case studies of practices that we've done this for recently. We worked with Dr. Morgan in North Carolina. We negotiated 5 of his PPO contracts, and 2 networks were optimized that resulted in over $64,000 in additional revenue. We worked for Dr. Baker recently in Texas, 5 negotiated contracts, 3 optimized networks. It was over $79,000 boost in revenue. And Dr. Young in Florida, 7 PPOs, 4 networks, over $100,000 in additional revenue. So again, I'm here to tell you now, number one, not only is this possible, but it happens every single day, okay? The framework that I've gone over today is possible, but you can also implement it yourself in your practice and see results. One of the benefits of working with us, like I said, are the things that we've gone over so far, okay? Both number one, we've got the resources, we have the time, we have the expertise, we have the process, and we have the team. Also, we know how to compare your offers received from PPOs. So in a situation where you're locked into a fee schedule, at a minimum, it's typically worth working with somebody like us, okay? Now, if you're looking to negotiate and optimize your PPOs, before you ever accept a PPO fee increase, so if you get halfway through this framework and you start to see fee schedule increases, but before you accept one, I really recommend that you talk to us to see if it's worth us following this up for you and completing this service on your behalf. Because every practice, like I said, every practice needs to improve the reimbursement rates. That's a given. But then also, I recommend you speak with one of our PPO experts. You talk about your specific practice. We'll go over your specific insurances, all the details involved with that, and come up with some plans and strategies. All you got to do, you can schedule a complimentary 30-minute phone consultation for being a Henry Schein customer. You can schedule that consultation today. It's free. We'll talk to either me or somebody else on our team to go through your specific account. So you can actually schedule a call. You can do it right now. Before all the slots book up, you do it at www.unitashsd.com to schedule a call. Again, 30 minutes. It's a free consultation. We'll talk to you about your specific practice. Worst case scenario, we spent 30 minutes giving you consulting on what we think you should do. Best case scenario, you decide to work with us and we can help you increase your reimbursement rates. Okay. Now also, last plug, you want to go over this information again. I don't know when this replay is going to come out. It usually takes a little bit of time to process this. This is information you want to start implementing now, or you want to share this with your owner doctor or your husband or your wife or your office manager or your best friend or your peer, whoever it is. Go download the guide right now. It's at www.ppoguide.com. You literally put your name, your email, you click download, you have the link, you can download the PDF right then, okay? In that download, we go through all the steps that we went through today and give any expounding information that we can, so that way you can actually implement this info. And again, please download that. And also, if you're looking to negotiate and you're serious about actually negotiating and optimizing your PPOs, please schedule a call with us. I'd be happy to chat with you about your practice. Our team would be happy to chat with you and consult you through that decision and let you know if it makes sense for us to work with you or if you should implement this on your own. We're happy to go through all that information with you today. Okay, I know that was a ton of information. We're about 46 minutes into here. So at this point, I want to start chipping away at some of these Q&As and questions. Adam, do you got some info for me or anything that you want me to cover, or do you want to start chipping away at these?
Let's start chipping away. There is a ton.
All right.
I feel like we got the secret sauce, though.
We may have hit a record of questions.
All right, let's see here. I'm just going to start from the top. Are the insurance companies allowed to just add a provider to an umbrella network?
So the short answer is typically yes. So an umbrella network, it depends on how you phrase that. I guess what you're asking is, are PPOs allowed to add me to or lease me out to another doctor? The answer is yes. Why they're allowed to do that is when you credential with an insurance company, typically in the contract that you sign, there's a provision in there that allows them to lease you to other PPOs. So it's 100% legal. They're able to do it. And typically they'll communicate it to you. And like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It all comes down to the reimbursement rate. So yes, they're definitely allowed to. And for many of you, it's probably happening to you now. You either realize it or you don't. And it can either be, like I said, it could be a good thing for you. It can either be a bad thing for you. So that's the purpose of going and asking those questions and finding out how are you participating per doctor, per location, to understand if those situations are happening. And then if they are, how to potentially fix them, or at least know that that's how you're going to get paid when you treat a patient. So
with PPO leasing, does the fee schedule stay the same throughout? For example, if we credentialed with Aetna and they leased out to another company, will we get Aetna's fee through that other company?
So that's typically how the leasing arrangement works. The party who's leasing out is leasing out their contracted rates to the other party. This party is leasing you because they either weren't able to or needed to get you a network because they had patients who want to be seen in your area. So typically the contracted reimbursement rate is what's utilized. Doesn't mean that it can't change. If Aetna decides to decrease their fee schedule, if Aetna decides to create within that leasing arrangement to drop you down to another accessible plan that you've also signed. Again, PPOs can change your reimbursement rates. They have a lot of power in what you're reimbursed. So leasing arrangements by their nature are not a bad thing. It's just a matter of getting a clear picture to understand what's happening, to understand what fee schedule is being utilized, am I being leased, and through what contracts. So at a minimum, you can know what is the snapshot of what's happening today, and then continue to audit your claims. So anytime a reimbursement rate changes off of what your reimbursement rate was supposed to be, you can call the insurance company and figure out why.
I tried to negotiate fees with an insurance company and they said due to COVID, they're not doing any negotiations. Do you find this happening at this time?
Yeah, it's not uncommon. We've had a lot of PPOs that go through seasons where they attempt to shut down the negotiation efforts. Sometimes that affects us, sometimes it doesn't. We haven't had much effect from PPOs, or at least in the reason being due to COVID. So in our experience, the majority of PPOs are willing to negotiate regardless of what's happening in the world today. So it's not that I haven't heard that before, but in our experience, that hasn't been a main reason for why the PPOs aren't negotiating. Could just be a reason that a rep gave you, either because they didn't want to negotiate or because maybe you weren't due to negotiate at that time, or they felt like you were on a high enough fee schedule, which again is still part of the negotiation process and we can continue to push. But there are specific reasons. They can say it's COVID, or they can just say that they're not willing to negotiate at that time.
Short and sweet here. What is a healthy UCR?
All comes down to using kind of two variables. So first variable you want to see is you want to collect all your fee schedules. You want to make sure at a minimum for your top procedures that they're above your highest reimbursing fee schedule. Typically, we say we want to see a margin of about 20 to 30%. there above your highest reimbursing fee schedule. That's usually the type of discount a PPO wants to show to a patient, and that a patient expects, is a margin of anywhere from 20 to 30% above the highest reimbursement. So that's one variable you can look at. And then also, like I recommended, there's analysis tools out there. I know Henry Schein has one. We use that same tool for our customers, but it also compares your UCRs against what other doctors in your area are pricing. So those are the two kind of levers you can use, or litmus tests is, what is my highest reimbursing fee schedule? Do I have enough margin there? And then also, what are my peers charging? Am I competitive in comparison to them? So I can't say for a pro fee, it needs to be X amount of dollars, because it varies across the state. And it depends on your reimbursements, and it depends what your peers are charging. So use your data. That's the best answer, because that's the best way to do it, is look at your fees, look at your peers' fees based on the analysis that you can get from Henry Schein or with us, or you can pay for it through other partners, and use those two things as a litmus test to set your UCR appropriately.
How do we handle the insurance company that says they will not send a fee schedule or they don't have one?
I'm guessing you're probably talking about Delta. Delta's been known to not send fee schedules. Again, it's part of the issue with them not negotiating. So we're trying to make inroads with Delta, but they've been somewhat difficult to work with before. And guessing that's probably who you're talking about. And so the best thing that you can do is start to, I know it sounds silly, but this is what most of our practices have to do, is as you kind of have to build a fee schedule off of what you receive. So as you maybe take your most recent EOBs, like take 100 of them, and hopefully out of those 100, you've done the at least your top 35 procedures, and whatever you received should be the fee schedule. So you can kind of build out based off of recent EOBs what the reimbursement rate is for each procedure, and then import that into Dentrix if you need to. That's the best way if they won't send it to you. Otherwise, if you're not talking about Delta, I haven't heard of a PPO that won't send fee schedules. If you're having trouble with them, again, reach out to us and we can at least give you guidance on what we've been experienced. Otherwise, we can help you. So
fee schedules are dropping and I don't recall receiving any notifications. How do they get away with this?
Well, in the contracts that you sign, a lot of times there's provisions in there that allow them to change the reimbursement rate. So while it can seem unfair or it can seem shocking, it's not unheard of. I know of a specific PPO this year that attempted to decrease reimbursement rates across the board. Some providers pushed back and they were able to maintain it. Some providers didn't push back and it happened. Some providers pushed back and nothing happened. It still went down. So they're able to do it based on the contract terms that they sign. But ultimately, you still have power over your participation. You don't have to be in network with the PPO. You're not locked into being in network with them. You can terminate the contract. You can work with somebody like us to negotiate that rate if it's gone down forcibly, to negotiate either back to where it was or ideally above that. Or like I said, you can work with somebody like us to optimize you away from that contract. So if that rate went down, well, essentially you can term the contract and get it shifted underneath one of their partnerships, which may be even better than where it was before it went down. So those are kind of some of your options there. Ultimately, I'd recommend if that's happening to you right now specifically and they've gone down, that you definitely want to jump on the phone with us so we can talk about which specific PPO you're referring to, what we've seen, what we've tried that's worked before. Okay. Our team is the people that you talk to are typically people that manage accounts. So they're doing the negotiations. So they have a lot of information they can use. They're really open with that info. So.
Let's see. Is there a better time of year to approach this process?
Typically, we haven't seen, again, there's seasons of time, but again, it's not seasons like fall, winter, spring. We'll just see that there's kind of ebbs and flow of times where some PPOs kind of pull back the reins and some of them don't. But we haven't really found that there's a specific time. I guess the best answer is like the old adage, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today, right? So ultimately, waiting around because you think that the calendar is going to determine it is not the right strategy. You want to get started right away. And every month that goes by on lower fee schedules is missed opportunity, and those are dollars that you'll never get back. So that's why I'm our biggest champion of Unitas, and I feel like I'm the dancing monkey hitting the cymbals around saying, you need to work with Unitas, you need to work with Unitas, because there's so much opportunity to make better reimbursement rates. And practices delay it, and they delay it for whatever reason. And obviously, they've always got good reasons. But again, there's people like us that can help you. And then also there's a framework we've outlined. So get started right away.
I'm in the process of renegotiating a fee schedule. I have not accepted it yet. Should I do these steps that you covered prior to accepting? And is there a limited time to accept a fee schedule renegotiation?
Answer is yes, yes, and yes. So number one, is there a limited time to accepting a renegotiation? Typically, from what we found, yes, that an offer can expire. Number two, should you follow these steps? Absolutely. Number three, should you talk to us before you accept the fee schedule? I would say yes, because if that offer is not competitive for your area, you're going to get locked into a fee schedule. And I know that sounds self-serving, but I've had too many conversations this month specifically with doctors that have said, I just accepted a fee schedule, and guaranteed it was lower than what was probably possible. So again, I'd say at a minimum, yes, know that can expire. And then also you should follow that framework, because that fee schedule that you just negotiated might not even be being utilized right now if you're being leased, right?
If a practice is moving to another location nearby, does it make sense to wait to negotiate?
If you're moving because you're just moving locations, or if you're moving because there was a transition and there's a new tax ID number, that can throw a wrench in things and make them not impossible, but the timing there is important. If you're just simply switching addresses, there shouldn't be that big of an issue. Typically, the time it takes to just even gather this information prior to picking up the phone to start to negotiate can take time. When we do it for a customer, the process of gathering for every doctor, how are you participating? What's the fee schedule they're being paid on? Are they eligible to negotiate? What's the effective date? That process can take, some PPOs will respond to that question after 3 days. Some of them will take 3 weeks. Some of them will take 3 months. On average, it takes about 90 days to get all that info back. So that's the thing, is this process takes some time. Even if you're doing it and you're calling every day, it can take time. It can take a few weeks. It can take a couple months. So if you're moving soon, I would say at a minimum, you're wanting to confirm your participation as soon as you can. Ultimately, you're still going to have to send in address change forms, and that can change. That shouldn't change your participation. If anything, it's just going to kind of be a separate issue at that point. So I'd say probably not worth waiting for, whether we do it for you or you do it on your own, because it's going to take you time to get that information anyways. I would start as soon as you can.
Are there any companies that you cannot negotiate with as a representative to a practice?
Yep. So Delta is one of those main ones that typically won't negotiate. That's not because we're a representative. That's just in general. There's other PPOs that either are a little bit harder to negotiate with, or depending on the depending on how they're feeling at that time, they might make it difficult for us to negotiate with. I know that there's specifically one PPO right now. I won't name them by name because I'm not sure if this is something that we've heard of this week, that's being a little bit more difficult to work with when it comes to a third party, but we're not sure if it's because we're a third party or if because they're just not negotiating at all. So we're still trying to figure that out. If it's because we're a third party, that's new. That hasn't really happened with us before, where they refuse to negotiate with us because we're a third party. Otherwise, it's not uncommon for a PPO to just tighten the reins and stop giving increases for a season of time, regardless of who's asking. So again, it just depends on the PPO. I won't give out any specific names yet because I don't know the exact answer, because we're still trying to figure that out and feel it out. But hopefully I should have an answer by the end of the week. So schedule a call with us. We'll let you know if that's happening, and if it's either third party specific or specific to that PPO. If it's specific to that PPO, everybody's going to experience that problem. We haven't really had a situation where being a third party inhibits us from negotiating consistently, and it's been a long period of time that's happened. So nothing that I've heard of.
Do specialty offices have an easier time or harder time negotiating?
From what I've heard from our team, and that's worked heavily with specialists, I don't think that there's been anything more difficult. When it comes to specialists, it depends on the specialty type and it depends on the PPO. Some PPOs have specialty specific fee schedules. Some of them just they put you on what's called the GP fee schedule. So every specialist gets put on that fee. So if there's going to be a difficulty there, it would be if you're on a specialist fee schedule, is that type of a fee schedule a percentage of UCR? And if that's the case, typically those never change. Or is it a straight reimbursement rate? And is that reimbursement rate unique to your specialty, or is it unique to is it just for all doctors? So specialists don't have it. From my experience, what I've heard from our team, there shouldn't be a more difficult experience. It just depends on how that PPO works and really what our process will be at that point. So, but by their nature, they shouldn't be more complicated in terms of negotiations. So hopefully that answered your question.
All right, we are at the hour. Philip, if you've got a couple more minutes, we've got tons of questions to get through. We're not going to get through all of them.
Yep.
So again, unitashsd.com, or feel free to email Philip, and we will get answers back to you as quickly as possible.
For sure. Yeah. I'm happy to stay on here as long as you guys want me to. Happy to.
What insurances, if any, do not negotiate?
I think I answered that. Typically Delta. Delta is really the only one that historically won't negotiate. Other PPOs are either known to negotiate all the time. Other PPOs are kind of about 50-50, but the only one that's historically shut us down and dentists down indefinitely and for a long period of time has been Delta. Otherwise, other PPOs either have negotiated in the past and or we have opportunities to optimize. So there's a higher reimbursement potential, whether we negotiate or we optimize. So just Delta.
Can the PPO fee change during a contract, and are they allowed to lower the fee whenever they want?
Technically, yes. Can it change? Yes. Are they allowed to lower the fee? Yes. When it changes, it's typically changing because you've been leased to a different contract. It's not very common that they just take your fee schedule and bump it down. When that happened with that specific PPO earlier this year, that was the first time we'd ever heard of that happening across the board on a major level, where they just determined and started to try to shift providers down fee schedules. Otherwise, if your rate has changed, it's likely because either one, you're no longer a network because you missed a recred date, or two, you've been leased out to another PPO and didn't know that it happened. And you don't know which PPO that is. Another reason why it's important to map out your participation and your reimbursements to know how it is now. So that way, as you process and receive EOBs, you can compare against what you found. And if there's a discrepancy, you can look into it.
Do you recommend dropping all PPOs, and does Unitas help with that?
There's a lot of practices that like the idea of dropping all PPOs. While it seems advantageous, it's pretty unrealistic, I'd say. Do we help you analyze whether or not you should continue to remain with the PPO? Absolutely. When we go through the negotiation process, if a reimbursement rate is still too low and that patient base is relatively small, can we help you get out of network with that PPO? Yes, we can. Can we help mitigate that risk? Yes, we can. Most practices, though, are either they're like ready to go all in with PPOs or they're completely fee for service. The ideal of going out of network entirely is not necessarily something that I think is realistic in most areas, because we're basically too far into the mix of of patients expecting to receive a discount and expecting to have that discount be associated to insurance to totally drop PPOs, bill them your fee, and expect the majority of patients to stick around. It's not impossible, and it's not that patient practices haven't done it before, but it is pretty unlikely. So for us, the name of the game is trying to negotiate the highest reimbursement rate that you can to maintain a specific level of profit. But at some point, if that profit is unattainable or you can't get a reimbursement rate that's better, and the patient base isn't that popular to you, you can consider dropping them, and we can help you get out of network if it needs to come to that. Okay.
Can different dentists in the same general area have different fee schedules?
Absolutely. Yep. So most PPOs will have standard fee schedule within the area, but there's obviously a large variation. That's why we exist, is to negotiate and improve reimbursement rates. It's very common that practices can have different reimbursement rates than somebody down the street. That comes down to a bunch of different variables. Did they negotiate? You didn't? When did they sign up with that PPO versus when you signed up with that PPO? Are they in network through a different leasing contract? That's one of the common things is if dentists do share, which they're not supposed to according to contract, say I'm getting paid X and you're getting paid Y, that could be short-sighted in that this doctor is a network through Guardian and this doctor is directly contracted. So that's why the reimbursement rates are different. So while they're different and that's frustrating, it's because the arrangements are different. So that needs to be fixed ultimately, but that's probably why there's a discrepancy. And then also they can just be on different fee schedules. Obviously the doctors we work with, we increase their fee schedule. So ideally, or hopefully that doctor is now at a higher fee schedule than other people in his area or her area. So yeah, absolutely. There's different fee schedules.
Which umbrella company has the best rates and has the most companies under them?
Best rates is a hard one. It depends on the umbrella network. In some states, some umbrellas have really, really good competitive rates. Some of them don't. It just depends on your state and depends on what they're willing to offer to us. I wouldn't say that there's one that's better than any of the others. And then as for breadth of a network, getting to the point now where the big four umbrella networks, the size of their network is from what I've seen, is pretty similar. So as far as I know, at least within major PPOs, I know there's some umbrella networks that have a really expansive network on smaller plans or employer-based plans. But I don't know if there's really one that wins out per se. It really just comes down to the reimbursement rate that's available with that PPO or that umbrella that we've been able to negotiate at that time. So we could go to Carrington and negotiate, and they might have a great fee schedule, but it might not be as good as Ellis or Carrington or Connection or the direct contract that's associated to that. So when it comes to umbrella networks, to me, it's not really an apples to apples game. It's a matter of each individual patient base. So if I've got Aetna patients, how do I maximize my reimbursement rate with Aetna? I can negotiate with Aetna, and then I can go look at all the other partnerships. If all those other partnerships, of all those options, which one's the best? That's the one I want, and I want to shift to that, whether that's through optimization or negotiating, and then you move on to the next patient base. So we look at umbrella networks as a means to accessing patients, but then also to accessing competitive reimbursement rates. So it's not that any one of them has, by their nature, a better fee schedule. It just comes down to each individual scenario and what's offered to you, what you're on now, and what's available, and how can you actually switch to that fee schedule based on how you're participating. I know that was a roundabout answer, but it really, the best way to say it is it just depends.
All right, we'll do one more question here, but I can tell we've got like 80 plus unanswered questions still. So I apologize if we did not get to your question. There will be future webinars in the coming months on PPO negotiations, I'm sure. So
and you can reach out to me for sure.
Yep. Yeah. Reach out to Phylip. Keep your eye out for those emails. We will be holding more of these types of webinars. So definitely come back for those. The last question here is, I know I think you answered it already, but there's a couple remaining. Can fee schedules be negotiated at any time, or can it only happen during recredentialing?
Can fee schedules be negotiated anytime, or can it only happen during recredentialing? It can be negotiated anytime, so long as it's been more than 2 years since you recently accepted either the last negotiated fee schedule or that you joined that PPO. So recredentialing is typically not associated to the renegotiation process. That's a pretty common misconception. Recredentialing is a concept that just needs to happen to continue to verify that you're current on your DEA, you're current on your license, that you're still a practicing dentist, that you don't have any major malpractice claims against you. All PPOs do that. They have varying timetables, but they want to keep recredentialing you to make sure that you're still a practicing dentist for all those reasons. Now, the renegotiating of the fee schedule, that should be disassociated from that. While the credentialing and the fee schedule typically start at the same time, those timelines can differ. So especially if you've never negotiated before. So you could be in network with a PPO for 12 years and never negotiated, and you're due to negotiate, right? And we can negotiate now. Or if you've been in network for 12 years and you've negotiated 6 months ago, you're going to be locked in that fee schedule, and you're going to be limited on the ability to negotiate. And then at that point, you could probably optimize if it's available to you. Hopefully that answers the question. I just chatted over my email. So everybody that's still on the call, there's a bunch of you still have questions, put my email in there. Take your question, shoot it to me via email. I'm happy to respond. I'll try to get to them today. And then also schedule a call with us. Go to www.unitashsd.com. It's 30 minutes. I will likely take your call. I take the majority of the calls that we have, and happy to go on the phone with you for 30 minutes. You can ask whatever questions you want. And hopefully I've represented that we like to share as much information as we can. Again, you can go through this framework that we've talked about today. You download it, go through it. You can implement this on your own. I highly recommend you talk to us. We can help you out. We can get some great results. So, Adam, any other things that we want to cover?
Any parting words? No, just thank you everyone for all the questions. Truly appreciate the engagement. Like you said, if you didn't get your question answered, email Phylip directly, unitashsd.com, or like I said, there will be more webinars to come in the future months here. So with that, Phylip, I want to thank you for your time and knowledge. If anyone is interested in attending future Henry Schein webinars, you can visit henryscheindental.com/webinars for our upcoming schedule. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be sent out to you hopefully within 1 week of today. So keep your eyes out for that. But yeah, that's it. Thank you all for joining, and hope to see you back here soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.